You're watching VinylicPumaGaming. Hello again, and welcome to the Borderlands 2 Rant Part 6. We've got a couple different topics to go over today. My goal for today, though, is going to be to keep this a little more Borderlands 2 focused, where the last video, we were actually a lot more focused on Borderlands 3. Now, that said, I am going to be discussing some new Borderlands 3 information if you guys are into that, so feel free to stick around. Otherwise, let's go ahead and we'll get into it. The first thing that I want to talk about is Borderlands 2's new use stations. Now, I know people think it's kind of ridiculous that Handsome Jack has the new use stations. He revives the Vault Hunters that ultimately end up killing him and stuff like that. But when you really start to think about it, Hyperion's new use stations are really messed up. Occasionally as you respawn, the new use station in Borderlands 2 will say, and I quote, "Hyperion suggests that you do not think about the fact that this is only a digital reconstruction of your original body, which died the first time you respawned. Do not think about this." There's also another quote that you can occasionally get from the new use stations that will also say, and I quote, "Greetings, clone of the recently deceased. Good luck in your future endeavors." When you start to think about both of these things, it becomes clear that the various playable characters do actually die and aren't necessarily being resurrected by Hyperion as we're led to believe. Both of these quotes seem to imply that your new you body that you get upon dying is actually a clone of you, complete with your memories, thoughts, and overall appearance up until the time of your death. The more terrifying question, though, is what happens to the original bodies and original consciousness of all 6 of the Vault Hunters in the game when they die for the very first time? Because the thing is that they're only being copied at the time of death. They aren't actually being resurrected. You've got to wonder what kind of legal agreement that Hyperion has the Vault Hunters' clone bodies under. If it's anything like a robot would be, your new you body may be property of Hyperion. So in a certain sense, maybe it's not actually all that weird that Hyperion is constantly reviving you so you can kill Handsome Jack. After all, think about how Handsome Jack rose to power. As we learn in the pre-sequel, he killed the former president of Hyperion and declared himself the new president. So who's to say that the guy that invented the new use stations at Hyperion isn't trying to kill Jack with your clone? I guess if you think about it, the consequences of using new use stations in the Borderlands universe must be pretty high. Not only do you forfeit your right to reproduce, but the person that actually responds isn't really even you. While it may resemble and think like you do, it's actually someone else entirely. Even worse, Hyperion may end up owning your cloned body, and it ends up being one of their puppets that they use to kill people. It would be pretty crazy if one of the other Vault Hunters was this undercover Hyperion agent that was using this crazy suggestion phrase, sort of like "would you kindly" from the BioShock series. This might actually be a semi-plausible way to make new use stations canon. Now, I know this isn't particularly anything new, but why do assault rifles in Borderlands 2 suck compared to both pistols and SMGs? In real life, SMGs are basically using pistol caliber bullets, and they are designed to be more portable. Perhaps they may have a higher rate of fire than assault rifles, but that's not always the case. Assault rifles, on the other hand, are based off of more conventional rifles and are designed for both accuracy, high magazine capacity, and rifle caliber bullets, which are generally more powerful than pistol caliber bullets. So it's mind-boggling to me that assault rifles in Borderlands 2 could be worse than SMGs in Borderlands 2. And off the top of my head, I can name several great SMGs. You've got the Sandhawk, the Slagga, the Bitch, the Good and Bad Touch, the Lascaux, Babymaker, Hellfire, and even the Avenger is a pretty good SMG. And even the E-Tech SMGs shine on certain characters with certain build types. As for assault rifles though, you really only have the Kitten, the Hail, the Leadstorm, the Becca, and maybe the Ogre as your truly exceptional assault rifles in Borderlands 2. There are a few other good assault rifles, but on average, it just seems like there are way more good or great SMGs and pistols than there are assault rifles in the game. And let's not even discuss E-Tech assault rifles, which are notorious for their terrible critical hit damage, as well as ridiculously high ammo consumption per shot. And you know what? Speaking of critical hit damage, assault rifles are also lacking in this area as well. While Jacobs assault rifles match the critical hit multipliers found on non-Jacobs pistols and SMGs, all the rest of the assault rifles in the game are inferior to both pistols and SMGs in terms of the critical hit damage potential. The only reason Gearbox did this was because they wanted to make assault rifles more balanced with SMGs and pistols for the game's first 2 playthroughs, and you'll notice that Gearbox took this similar approach with E-Tech weapons in both of the first 2 playthroughs as well. I know Gearbox is largely done with Borderlands 2, and it's extremely unlikely there will be any more patches to the game, but I think one thing Gearbox should look at in the future patch is the viability of the game's assault rifles towards the end of the game. It's a shame that almost an entire weapon class becomes way weaker than the others because it's incapable of dealing the same amount of critical hit damage that other weapon classes can at the game's highest level difficulty. Again, I guess it's nothing new, but I'd like to see E-Tech weapons as well as assault rifles become more viable at higher levels of play than they currently are. One thing that was frustrating about Borderlands 2 was the introduction of several items that are virtually useless, regardless of player level, player character, or even what kinds of other weapons and gear you may have. The first of which that I'd like to complain about is the Vault Hunter's Relic. The Vault Hunter's Relic is some bullshit. No one even knows if it actually does anything. It simply just says that it increases the chance of finding rare loot by 5%. What does this even mean? If we're considering this to be rare loot, then blue rarity items are a part of the rare category of items. So does this relic increase the chances that you might find blue rarity weapons by like 5%? And if that's the case, that's useful early on, but it isn't particularly useful later on in the game. Or does the Vault Hunter's Relic boost the chances of finding rare loot like legendary weapons? According to an old article on the Gearbox Software website, the drop for legendary items was 0.009%, or 1 in 10,000. With the Vault Hunter's Relic, that boosts your chances to a measly 0.0094%. So even if the Vault Hunter's Relic makes legendary items more common, it doesn't make your chances of getting a legendary that much greater. And I think what's even more sinister is that the Vault Hunter's Relic was offered as a pre-order bonus when it might not even do anything. So if you pre-ordered Borderlands 2 at launch, you got an item that may not even do what is advertised. Speaking about worthless relics, there's also some bullshit surrounding the mysterious amulet from the Dragon Keep DLC. Now, while this actually does something if everyone in the party has one equipped, it merely provides players with a unique aura consisting of hearts, stars, and various shades of pink and red. It also claims to boost the friendship stat by +7, which doesn't even affect the game's mechanics at all. Now, there's been a whole ton of speculation as to what this thing does, but I'm not really sure that I buy any of it. One of the more common ideas was that the mysterious amulet would boost the effects of the pixie buffs that you would receive from the pixies as you played through the Dragon Keep DLC. Now, there hasn't really been any significant proof of this though, and the other thing is, wouldn't the amulet be more useful as you were playing through the DLC as opposed to after you completed it? After all, the amulet side quest that you undertake in order to get this thing requires the final mission of Dragon Keep to be completed. Why would they give you an item that boosts the effects of pixies, but you can only use it once you've beaten the DLC and therefore no longer need the pixies? In my opinion, the mysterious amulet does virtually nothing, and I don't think that should be that surprising considering some of the semi-worthless relics in this game. I just hope that you didn't waste too much time with these items. Alright guys, so now I want to talk about Borderlands 3. So I found a couple new Borderlands 3 articles from both IGN and GameSpot that basically just say that Randy Pitchford has confirmed that Borderlands 3 will not be on the Nintendo Switch. Now, this appears to be based off of a Twitter exchange between Randy and a Twitter user by the name of Joey Landry. So I'll go ahead and I'll read the exchange, and here it goes. Randy, what's your take on hashtag Nintendo Switch running at Unreal Engine 4? Randy replies, we have Borderlands the pre-sequel on NVIDIA Shield, so why not? Why not, you ask? Because my Switch purchase is contingent on if it will play at Borderlands 3, no pressure. And then, of course, Randy follows up by saying, I do not see that as happening. We're talking to Nintendo, but that stopped for some reason. They have other priorities. So something we know is that the Nintendo Switch is very similar to the NVIDIA Shield, and actually it appears that both Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel can run on both the tablet version as well as the TV version of the device. I don't think it would be totally far-fetched if we saw a port of Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel on the Nintendo Switch if the console sells well enough. After all, they are getting a port of Skyrim, which is going to be like a 6-year-old game this year. As for Borderlands 3, honestly, I don't think anyone can blame Randy and Gearbox Software for saying what they're saying. The fact is that the Switch isn't as powerful as the base Xbox One, let alone the base PlayStation 4. And also, with the PlayStation 4 Pro out right now, and the Xbox Scorpio that's going to be coming out later this year, the Switch isn't going to be able to compete with either of those consoles power-wise. I know there is discussion that the Switch can run Unreal Engine 4 games, but the Wii U could run Unreal Engine 3 games. In fact, Borderlands 2 came out about 2 months before the Wii U did, and the game didn't even get released on the console. Ever. Keep in mind too that was back at a time when the Wii U was on par with both the 360 and PS3 in terms of power. In fact, it might have actually been a little more capable than the 360 was. In the best case scenario, if Borderlands 3 is released on the Switch, it may end up running as well as Borderlands 2 does on the PlayStation Vita, which means probably not that great. I guess at the end of the day, it's very likely that Borderlands 3 won't be coming out on the Nintendo Switch. And that's simply because while it's an innovative and it's probably a great piece of tech, it's not really in line with what third-party developers want. The Nintendo Switch is a portable console that is running games in HD. We've got consoles right now that are focusing on HDR support and 4K resolution as their main selling points. Again, I'm not going to say that it's totally out of the realm of possibility. After all, we did get Borderlands 2 on the PlayStation Vita, but even then, that port doesn't run as well as the Xbox 360 or even the PlayStation 3 versions of the game. So I would suspect that the Nintendo Switch version of Borderlands 3 would run about as well as Borderlands 2 runs on the Vita. Overall, I think it's a shame because it seems like Borderlands would do really well on a Nintendo console, especially if you aren't getting a lot of games like Battlefield or any of the more technically demanding third-party games on the Switch. I guess time will tell, but the way Randy is making things sound now, a Nintendo Switch version of Borderlands 3 is probably not going to happen. Before we go, I'd like to talk a little more about Always Online DRM. While I've talked about this before in several other videos, it's time that we discussed Always Online DRM yet again and why I think it's going to be a bad idea to implement it into the next Borderlands game. So, I think the biggest problem with Always On DRM is that you have to be connected to the server in order to play the game that you just paid for. The sole purpose of that being to prevent copyright infringement of the software in question. So basically, Always On DRM is an attempt to prevent piracy of the game. Now, I understand that if you were like the intellectual property owner of a video game, you're going to want to protect your IP, but I think there's a better way to do it than to tether your customers to an online server somewhere, especially when the server has the potential to suffer outages or even DDoS attacks like we saw with Xbox Live and PlayStation Network in late 2014 and 2015. I think one of the more common things I see is that having server-side characters would prevent people from cheating in the next Borderlands. Thus, having Always On DRM would be a good idea. While I would agree that this would curb some cheating or rampant use of things like the Gibbed Save Editor, I don't really see how having server-side characters is going to stop absolutely everyone from cheating. And what I think would happen is that the cheats used would simply change. Back when I used to play a lot lot of Diablo 2, there was this popular thing that you could download called a map hack, and what it would do is it would reveal locations of where you need to go on this procedurally generated map that the game used. And as you can imagine, this made farming the game's various bosses for their loot much easier and much faster, especially if your character had the teleport ability, which allowed them to warp there almost instantly. My point is, even if you eliminate things like dual duping and the use of save editors, you're not going to entirely stop the use of third-party software with always-on DRM. And I think a great example of that is based on some of what I've heard about Tom Clancy's The Division. That game had a slew of problems with hackers at launch, and while much of that may have been fixed by now, always-on DRM didn't deter cheaters at the time. Look at what happened with Borderlands 2 and how so many resources were spent on patching things like clipping on walls and certain surfaces. Even when Gearbox was able to make a proper patch, the player base always seemed to be able to find a way around it. Case in point, the Digistruct Peak exploit that allowed you to go to the very end arena by jumping through the ceiling in the starting area. Now, Gearbox was able to patch this out, but people found a superior route by combining bada-boom rocket jumps with the Grog Nozzle's drunk effect to get to oh my god what the hell almost as soon as they started the Digistruct Peak challenge. I don't know guys, I've made my opinions on this pretty clear. What I will say is that I know it's ultimately Gearbox's decision and they can do what they want because it is their game. But I really hope that the next Borderlands isn't going to be always online. Alright guys, that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like, and let's see if we can get to 1,500 likes on this particular video. If we can't, no big deal. I'll be here tomorrow. But again guys, like this video if you liked it, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.